Light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. I listened to it was a tape series based on a book by the author Barbara Sher, and I thought it was a wonderful strategy that she presented that I thought I would like to pass along. It was the basic idea of creating your imaginary family. Instead of running away from having imaginary friends, to use that dynamic constructively. If you wanted to create an imaginary family, who would be your ideal father, your ideal mother, your ideal brother, sister, aunt, uncle, cousin, whatever? And even if you don't want to think of it in terms of familial relations, maybe your invisible high council. Who is it that you would want to be able to sit down at a conference room table with and talk things over when you need to figure out how to make sense of this or that challenge? I think they used this method actually a few times a similar sort of dynamic. Within Star Trek: The Next Generation, where people would go to the holodeck and they would create a program, and maybe they needed to deal with a scientific challenge, and so they wanted to discuss it with Albert Einstein. And so they would have, based on all the available data, the holodeck would create a representation of Albert Einstein, and they would go in and talk about this complex problem with Albert Einstein in ways that we can only imagine, that we can't do in that direct sense like they could within the television show Star Trek: The Next Generation. And so in this book, Barbara Sher, or as I listened to it on tape, Barbara Sher was describing how the people she would pick, because she wanted them there so that she could talk with them about whatever came up, challenges and emotional struggles, and how would you make sense of this, and Christians within certain circles like to say, well, what would Jesus do? And it is just as legitimate, I think, to ask, well, what would Galileo do? Or what would Joan of Arc do? Or what would Madame Curie do? Or what would Harriet Tubman do? What would Malcolm X or Martin Luther King do? And we don't know. These are just personal speculations, but the idea behind it is that it allows people to think about challenges and different ways of solving them that might be different than what you would initially think of doing to solve them. That to understand that from what we know of Harriet Tubman, she would pick a certain way to address a challenge, where Albert Einstein might pick a very different way of addressing a challenge. And the way that we ultimately address our own challenges might be a synthesis of both. But to use all of the knowledge that is available to us within the current generation, and to integrate it in creative ways, and to invite additional possibilities, and to understand that these are our own projections and imaginations, and so they're not historical facts that we quote to anybody, but if they are genuinely empowering, then it has served a good purpose to do so, and we have used our imagination in a practical, pragmatic, constructive sort of fashion. I'm reminded of the movie The Rescuers, a Walt Disney movie that came out, I guess now many years ago, but I still remember it like it was yesterday. And I do have a copy that I watch again from time to time, but there's a scene in there where the two mice who are going to rescue the little girl Penny from from where she's being held captive in somewhere in a Louisiana bayou, and they're so discouraged because everything has gone wrong and this hasn't worked out, and how will we ever do this, and it just seems so insurmountable. And Ava Gabor, as the voice of Miss Bianca, says, we can't give up. Everybody at the Rescue Aid Society is counting on us. The Rescue Aid Society isn't there, and they can't do anything directly, but something about knowing, not that they'll be upset if we go back and face them and have failed, but that they're counting on us. They gave us this commission, this mandate to do this, to accomplish this. They put their faith in us to get this job done. I mean, that's another theme that keeps coming out in the movie Rescuers again and again, where Rufus the cat says, you have to have faith. And Penny says, what's faith? And Rufus responds, faith is a bluebird you see from afar. It's as sure and as real as the first evening star. Can't touch it or buy it or wrap it up tight, but it's there just the same, making things turn out right. And at the end, Penny says again, when she's been rescued, faith makes things turn out right. Having faith in ourselves and faith in each other. And in a sense, one could jokingly say, having faith in our invisible friends. It's not, in my humble opinion, it's not a sign of mental dysfunction that we have invisible friends. It's a question of what sort of relationship we have with those friends. Whether they are, even if they are just figments of our imagination, whether they are empowering or whether the interactions and relationships we have with those ideas or those projections are somehow having a negative effect on our life, making it more difficult for us to deal with our challenges rather than easier to deal with our challenges. You know, if someone is living in isolation and there is no one else available, in the one movie with Tom Hanks, he is stranded on a desert island by himself and winds up making friends with a volleyball and giving it a name and painting a face on it. Because of the manufacturer, he decided that the volleyball's name was Winston. And Winston is his only friend for a very, very long time. And then when he finally builds a raft to escape from the deserted island through in a storm, Winston somehow comes loose from the raft and begins to float away. And it is heart-wrenching as he is trying to reclaim the only friend he's known for probably over a year, quite a number of months at the very least, the only companion he's had. And it's heart-wrenching, and he's sobbing as his friend is floating away in the ocean, never to be seen again. It was a volleyball. It was not a real person, but it was what gave his mind a way of anchoring and of staying sane through isolation that would have otherwise been mentally debilitating and crazy-making, quite literally. Was he crazy to give a name to a volleyball and interact with it as a friend? I don't think the word crazy is the right word. I think it's a method and it's a way of dealing with things that allowed him to do what he otherwise could not have done to survive that whole experience. The only thing I can think of personally to relate that to, well, maybe not the only thing, but the first one that comes to mind is my first ever bodybuilding competition, without which I probably would have never become Sister Who, but that's a long story that I'm working on putting into a book at the moment. I specifically got into bodybuilding because I specifically went to the third Gay Games in Vancouver because I wanted to know what it meant to be gay, and this would be an opportunity to talk to gay and lesbian people from all over the world and find out what it was like to be gay within whatever culture or subculture they considered their native subculture or their native home. So, and that's where I began to learn that there are as many ways of being gay as there are gay people. And there are as many ways of being an individual as there are individuals. And I chose to participate in bodybuilding specifically because I didn't know of any team to join. I was by myself, in a sense, trying to participate, but not having a team to join and not really knowing how else to proceed. So I looked at all the individual sports, and then I picked bodybuilding basically because it was the sport for which I felt least qualified, and which would therefore signify the greatest accomplishment to me. But I understood fairly quickly that it wasn't about the 90 seconds I would be on stage in the actual competition. It was about showing up for the workouts every single day between now and then to be sure that when the time came, I would not lose for no other reason than that I failed to prepare. So I had to be dutiful in doing my homework, doing my preparation, doing the exercises every single day, even though I couldn't see any difference from one day to the next, doing it anyway, and drinking my protein shakes, and everything I could figure out, every way I could learn about what would be expected of me when I was there and what would signify accomplishment. And then getting there, and from one totally new experience to the next, and going through it and doing my performance on stage, and after having held myself to this restrictive diet for the better part of a year, no fried foods, no bread, no desserts, oh my goodness, high protein, lots of fruits and vegetables, and I got back up to the exercise warm-up room above and behind the stage where the competition took place. And one of the volunteers who was staffing the room congratulated me and shook my hand and said, "Okay, you've done it. What would you like to do now?" And I thought real hard for a moment, and then I got this mischievous smile, and I pulled out my wallet and I gave him a $5 bill, and I said, "I want you to go next door to the McDonald's and bring me back a vanilla shake." And because it was something that was totally taboo for the whole time I was in training. And actually ever since, when I finish a bodybuilding competition because I've done a total of 5 bodybuilding competitions at the present time, I always celebrate by having pizza and ice cream after I've finished the competition, because those are things that I cannot have throughout the whole preparation time. But he kind of laughed, and he took the $5 bill and went out to do as I asked. And then when he came back, he was laughing all the more, and he said, "I got threatened by no less than 3 female bodybuilders on the way up the stairs. Where are you taking that?" And it was a way of celebrating and being present and enjoying it. But I never met the 3 female bodybuilders, and there were all kinds of other people, the people who wrote the books that I read about bodybuilder nutrition and exercise and so forth. I've never met them. They were invisible people who were supporting what I was doing. They were people that in whatever ways I could, I would consult with them and see, well, what does he say about this? What does he think about this? Too often, we get anchored in this traditional sort of thing where we run our lives according to other people's expectations that we be what they consider normal. And normal is a setting on the washing machine that does not necessarily support your life. This is making a big jump in another direction, but somewhere in the early 1990s, I had someone introducing me to tarot cards also, and I continued to find them to be collections of symbols, not really that different from Rorschach ink blots, except perhaps drawn with a little more intention, I suppose. But they're just basically ink on pieces of cardboard, and meaning is assigned. It's not inherent in them. But in learning how to read the cards, and then in reading the cards for others, what I would often tell them is hold on to whatever is helpful and let the rest go. In doing readings for people, I do my best. I use my intuition. I use all the knowledge I can bring to it, and I don't ask them any questions. I ask them not to volunteer information, because all I want to give them is the benefit of my intuition. Just what pops into my head, and what comes to my imagination as I look at the images, and then it is for them to interpret how what I see in those images is helpful to their life. And that's where I tell them, hold on to whatever is helpful and let the rest go. Whether it's imaginary friends, whether it's your invisible high council, whoever it is you imagine if you imagine that you can sit down at a table and talk with Carl Sagan about scientific theories, how would Carl Sagan answer this? Well, you can read some things in his books, but there were a lot of things he never wrote down. And the same with every other historical person you could name. If you could have a conversation with Leonardo da Vinci, what would he say? I have no idea, but I have no reason to question whatever your imagination presents as a possible answer. But again, it's the same as with those tarot readings. Hold on to whatever is helpful and just let the rest go. It's somebody's best effort. It may be a fleeting thought that means nothing. If it's not helpful, just let it go. It's just wind going by, leaves in the wind that blow past your feet, and you don't have to pay any attention to them. The leaves that you pay attention to are the colorful ones that land in your hand and that impress themselves upon you as something that you can use for a leaf rubbing or an artistic creation or a dried arrangement, something that you yourself can do something with. And you love my grammar there. With which you can do something. I was noticing the details. Holding on to what is helpful and letting the rest go. And to some extent, I hear atheists sometimes speak disparagingly of people in churches and such. And I describe myself as an eclectic mystic because I draw different pieces from a lot of different belief systems, from Christianity, from neo-paganism, from New Age spirituality, from Buddhism. I am a Christian, though, in the sense of someone who aspires to be genuinely Christ-like. But I don't really follow the tenets of any particular example of institutionalized Christianity. I'm not sure that Jesus would either, actually. If Jesus came back today, I think he would be mortified at what the churches have done with the stories attributed to him. And I think it would be most amusing if he would go through and edit the stories. No, this happened, that didn't happen, this happened this way, it wasn't like that. It would be a really enlightening and interesting conversation if it were ever possible. But in any case, yes, I consider myself a Christian in the sense of one who aspires to be Christ-like. But of course, what that means in practice is always being worked out. And, well, does it mean this or does it mean that? And what would Jesus do in this situation? Well, it's more accurate to say, what would Jesus, as I understand him, do within this situation? Because the Jesus who is really Jesus may be completely different from the Jesus whom I understand. And that could be said about every other historical figure you could name. You know, if we got to actually have a conversation with George Washington, who wanted the presidency to be a volunteer position that was not paid anything, obviously it didn't work out that way, but it would be it's fascinating to consider how would our government be different if George Washington had managed to persuade all of the founding fathers who wrote the first Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and all that, if he had managed to convince them that political office was a form of public service and as such should never be a paid position, so that all our congressmen and senators and presidents and everybody in any such position would have to be supported by other means because all the work they do on behalf of their country would be completely voluntary and not paid. Boy, would that change things. Or it could anyway. And, and then if we had stuck to that same ideal encouraged by George Washington and prevented all bribery and all monetary exchange related to lobbying, that nobody was allowed to contribute any money to election campaigns or anything, that money was kept totally separate from the operation of government so that government could remain in a more ideal, honest, accountable sort of state, that it would be truly serving its objective of doing good government rather than becoming an alternative economic objective for anyone. I think that's my understanding of what George Washington wanted, that was quickly lost in the discussion, that did not become part of how the United States is run. Perhaps at some point in the future we'll come back to that, but if I was going to have, if I could have a conversation with George Washington, that's probably what I would want to talk about. With Thomas Jefferson, I would want to talk about race relations. My understanding is that he had a black slave whom he loved and with whom he had children, but he lived within a time in which the very notion of interracial marriage was completely impossible. I don't know the exact circumstances under which his slaves lived, but I know that if he had tried to liberate them in that time, life would have been far worse for them, because it was not a friendly time to be a racial contrast in North America. There was so much learning about interracial relationships and about mutual respect and about, well, even in the present time, we still haven't really accomplished an understanding of becoming a mutually respectful global community. We're still working on it, and we have so far to go. But there's certain places around the world where it is safer to be someone looking in that direction, and other places where it is specifically dangerous to be a person there speaking in terms of global community, because there is so much nationalism and narcissism and xenophobia, even among some of the Native American events that I've heard of in the last several years. For a moment, it seemed that there would be this coming together of humanity for a common cause, and then various Native Americans became very xenophobic toward everyone who wasn't Indian enough. Well, I don't know whether, for a lot of Christians, I'm not Christian enough, but for a lot of pagans, I'm not pagan enough. I'm not gay enough for some of the gays. I'm not straight enough for some of the straights. I was once told that because Sister Who doesn't do shows or performances in gay and lesbian bars, that I'm not gay enough. And I just said, well, that's not my venue, but I have no objection to doing a show there if they wanted me to, but no one's ever asked me to. And I don't know that I'm a singer or a dancer or a performer in that sense as much as that I strive to be a teacher and a minister. And I don't know how you would take the ministry of, how you would take the work of ministry and teaching and put it into those kinds of settings. I think I would do much better at a conference or a workshop than in that setting. But the notion that I wasn't gay enough because I wasn't doing bar shows, I almost laughed, but I was more respectful to the person because it was just their sincere opinion, and they're entitled to their opinion. I just found it a very amusing opinion, I guess. But when we try to put categories around how things should be, I guess it comes back to the first truly openly gay man I met, I guess. I met one gay man before that, or a couple gay men, but they were very frightened lest anyone find out. But I went to a service of an organization called Dignity, which is for gay and lesbian Catholics. And I met a man there named Steve, who I still, we've lost touch over the years, but I still think of him as a sort of godfather and big brother when it comes to gay spirituality. And I learned so much from him, and he was so formative to me in those first few years. But on a lighter note, he told me once, never should on yourself. And which, whenever I say that, makes people giggle. But yes, it really is good advice, though, that instead of saying, I should be this, or I should be that, or I should be more normal, I think you should be yourself. And if you find it empowering to look at Rorschach ink blots, or tarot cards, or advent calendars, or historical maps, or Hubble telescope photographs, hold on to whatever is helpful and let the rest go. Thank you very much for watching.